In 2025, we were promised AI would make our jobs easier. Instead, for millions, it made their jobs disappear. Some roles vanished faster than expected, not everywhere and not all at once. Dr. Roman Yampolskiy predicted extreme outcomes, even suggesting 99% unemployment. We're treating that not as destiny but as a warning, and testing how much 2025 actually confirms or contradicts it. Teachers, coders, and middle managers all faced unexpected pressure in 2025, but the pattern varies by industry and region. We'll show which roles collapsed, which ones shifted, and which 5 jobs still survive. And we'll lean on major 2024-25 labor reports to separate hype from reality. To understand how we got here, we should start with what was predicted and how the actual story of 2025 reshaped it. The predictions versus the reality. When Dr. Roman Yampolskiy first warned about artificial intelligence taking nearly all human jobs, many dismissed it as too radical to be taken seriously. His vision of mass unemployment, professions hollowed out, and machines outperforming humans in ways we couldn't anticipate sounded more like science fiction drama than economic forecasting. Yet here in 2025, the picture is less clear-cut. Some areas have advanced slower than his timeline suggested, while others have accelerated at a pace that surprised even cautious observers. The result is an uneven reality where parts of his warning feel possible, but not in the way he originally outlined. Education is one of the more complex examples. For years, it was assumed the bond between teacher and student would shield the profession from automation. Instead, some institutions began experimenting with AI tutoring platforms and adaptive learning tools, particularly under extreme budget pressures. In certain cases, this did lead to reductions in adjunct and non-tenure positions, but the full replacement of large teaching staffs has not materialized. Privacy regulations, such as data protections modeled on FDRPA, have slowed widespread adoption by limiting the kind of sensitive student data AI systems can freely access. So while AI is steadily influencing the way lessons are personalized and tracked, the classroom is far from empty. The wider pattern points less to mass dismissal of teachers and more toward selective cuts, where financial strain collides with administrative willingness to rely heavily on digital tools. Programming tells a slightly different story. In the early 2020s, Learn to Code was marketed as the safest career bet in a changing economy. That security now looks far less stable. Tools like GitHub Copilot and competing AI assistants automate vast amounts of routine programming work and have become widely adopted across tech industries. Teams once requiring several developers may now function with fewer, as AI handles much of the repetitive code generation and debugging. Crucially, however, developers have not disappeared altogether. Most continue to work, but their roles are shifting, supervising AI-generated code, ensuring compliance, managing integration, and handling edge cases that current models still struggle with. Background research confirms heavy adoption of AI assistants across the sector, with large code corpora fueling rapid automation of standard programming tasks. The profession is being reshaped, compressed in some areas, redefined in others, but not fully erased. Management demonstrates yet another pattern. Traditionally, mid-level managers were considered safe because of the interpersonal and decision-making nature of their responsibilities. But routine management tasks, scheduling, coordinating projects, tracking reports, were among the easiest for companies to hand off to automated systems. This erosion reduced the justification for certain mid-tier roles, and in some organizations, it translated into downsizing. Still, rather than wholesale elimination, many managers have been pushed toward higher-value responsibilities that machines struggle to replicate, such as long-term strategic planning and sensitive negotiation. Where reskilling hasn't happened quickly enough, layoffs followed, leaving many former supervisors displaced. Research from firms like PwC reinforces this uneven shift. Demand for managerial skills is changing swiftly, with automation hollowing out certain functions, while heightening the need for adaptability, decision-making, and cross-domain leadership. These 3 snapshots, teaching, coding, and management, capture the odd mismatch between forecasts and reality. Occupations that were once labeled future-proof are under heavy pressure, though not in the absolute or all-at-once sense that extreme predictions implied. Teachers aren't disappearing en masse, but resource-strapped institutions are experimenting with tools that sideline some roles. Developers haven't all lost their jobs, but the profession is fragmenting under automation pressures. Managers are still present, but fewer are needed for repetitive oversight, and those who remain are expected to broaden their skill sets. The pattern shows workforce reshaping, not across-the-board annihilation. Complicating the narrative further are contrasts between popular beliefs in the early 2020s and lived reality today. At first, the expectation was that low-skilled manual jobs would fall as machines learned how to move boxes, sort packages, or flip burgers, while higher knowledge work would be shielded. Instead, knowledge professions in education, coding, finance, and administration are being automated at remarkable speed, while manual labor persists because physical environments remain stubbornly unpredictable for robots. A leaking pipe still calls for a local plumber. A faulty electrical system still demands hands-on expertise. Intellectual tasks, by contrast, are increasingly being handed to models that can process information at superhuman speed. Still, not all data support a narrative of collapse. PwC's Jobs Barometer for 2025 and similar analyses show remarkable nuance. In many AI-exposed industries, wages are actually rising as AI augments rather than replaces workers. Even in professions under pressure, employees who integrate AI tools effectively often improve productivity and secure better-paying positions. This mixed picture suggests a future less about job elimination everywhere and more about fragmentation into different skill demands, where those who adapt may thrive even as others are squeezed out. That nuance doesn't erase the frustration experienced by workers who feel they were misled. Governments, universities, and career counselors branded roles in tech, education, and organizational leadership as secure paths. Many workers invested years of study and financial resources expecting stability. Now faced with abrupt changes, they feel betrayed. Some joke about it. A popular quip is that while people were advised to learn to code, the AI skipped ahead and now teaches the class, but humor masks the anxiety. Retraining increasingly feels like a revolving cycle, where entering one supposedly resilient field only leads to another unexpected disruption. In that context, Roman's earlier warnings land differently today. The sweeping claim of 99% unemployment remains far from realized, but the tone of alarm resonates more strongly than it once did. Parts of the forecast missed in detail, yet the sense that the ground is shifting under workers' feet is undeniable. Many of the roles society placed hope in as anchors of stability have turned fragile more quickly than planned. The big twist is that industries once perceived as safest are among the first to be shaken, forcing a re-examination of how societies and workers think about resilience in employment. This evolving tension sets the stage for what comes next. The question is no longer just whether jobs will disappear, but which kinds of roles are destabilizing more rapidly than anyone thought possible, and why those shifts are happening now. The jobs vanishing faster than expected. For years, the most common assumption was that automation would largely replace heavy lifting and low-level factory work, while professional office jobs, requiring higher skills and judgment, would remain secure. By 2025, that calculation no longer looks reliable. The sectors facing the fastest contraction are not on assembly lines, but inside offices where contracts are reviewed, market data is analyzed, and code is written. The new reality is challenging the definition of what we once considered a safe career. Consider legal research. Law firms historically hired large pools of junior associates to sift through precedent and case law. Today, AI platforms accomplish this task in seconds, extracting relevant rulings and drafting initial summaries with a consistency humans cannot match. Partners are confronted with software that costs less than junior teams and avoids common clerical mistakes. In practice, that has translated into fewer entry-level opportunities and persistent oversupply of graduates with training that no longer matches demand. This erosion isn't theoretical. The restructuring is already visible and is reshaping how law schools feed into the profession. Parallel change is underway in finance. Market analysis once relied on analysts catching subtle patterns, combining intuition with technical expertise. But the same strengths are now outperformed by machine learning models trained on decades of structured financial data. These systems can scan signals far quicker than teams of people, leaving only a reduced group of supervisors to monitor outputs and satisfy regulatory requirements. The shift creates a sharp divide. Machines produce the bulk of analysis, while humans translate results into executive briefings. Workers trained to dig into spreadsheets now find themselves explaining calculations they no longer perform directly. Software development illustrates the data paradox even more clearly. AI progresses fastest in environments rich with clean, consistent data. Public repositories contain millions of examples of code, giving training systems vast material to learn from. As a result, modern tools can generate functional programs with minimal prompting. Inside many firms, engineering departments that once depended on dozens of coders function now with a small central team, responsible mainly for verifying quality and compliance. Developers attempted to pivot, adopting new titles like prompt engineer, but even those niches proved fragile, as newer systems already need fewer and simpler instructions. A workforce sold on the promise of coding as a lifelong anchor career is confronting automation pressure earlier than most imagined. Education showcases a more uneven picture. These jobs long seemed secure because teaching involves complex social interaction and mentorship. Yet under financial strain, some institutions turn to AI tutoring and adaptive platforms as lower-cost alternatives, reducing certain adjunct and part-time staff. That pattern is real but selective. Adoption is slowed by regulatory and privacy constraints. Student data is fragmented across districts and closely protected, limiting the scale that AI platforms require to function effectively. In 2025, the outcome is uneven restructuring rather than wholesale replacement. Some teachers feel squeezed by budget decisions, while others continue working in schools where regulations and community priorities keep human-led instruction in place. The same cycle of rapid adoption is reflected in supporting roles created only a few years ago to help firms integrate AI. Positions like AI supervisor or data curator were designed to cushion displaced workers and promise new career stability. In practice, those very jobs came under automation pressure almost immediately. Updates that improved consistency and self-correction made support roles redundant at a surprising pace, creating short-lived career transitions. Retraining has begun to feel less like a safety plan and more like running in circles as technology repurposes new roles almost as quickly as they appear. These examples reveal a shift in the traditional split between blue-collar and white-collar labor. Factory jobs continue to be automated by robotics, yet office roles, once considered untouchable, are being automated faster where structured data exists in abundance. Law, finance, and coding all fit that pattern. Each field produces massive, clean records that can train systems efficiently. It is that combination, vast data resources matched with computing power, that makes automation in these domains faster than expected. Jobs built on repetitive text, numbers, or standardized logic are shedding workers at a pace that unsettles both employees and educators who spent years preparing people for them. Hiring trends confirm the effect. Professions that used to absorb new graduates are tightening, narrowing entry pathways just as more students cross the finish line. Meanwhile, roles emphasizing physical adaptability, such as repair work or skilled trades that involve unpredictable real-world environments, prove more resilient. These kinds of tasks remain resistant because the variability of hands-on situations is harder for algorithms to learn and often impossible to simulate with consistent data sets. The irony is stark. Tasks society assumed would vanish under automation persist, while jobs championed as future-proof white-collar options destabilize first. Manual roles, however, are not immune. Warehouse automation, food service robotics, and advances in driverless vehicles signal ongoing experimentation in replacing physical labor. But the difference lies in scale and consistency. White-collar positions are being reshaped faster because they can be codified into data sets and replicated through training models more easily. Automation reaches into both spheres at once, eroding the idea that any occupational category stands safely apart. It's no longer about whether manual or office jobs will go first. Pressure is climbing in both directions simultaneously, guided by where data and predictability create openings. That conclusion alters how workers evaluate their options. Moving upward into professional knowledge work is no longer a guarantee of stability. Instead, it exposes workers to industries where algorithms thrive on abundant data. By contrast, the trades, though far from risk-free, retain a kind of protection in their messiness, grounded in jobs that require physical improvisation and person-to-person trust. The entire cultural script of the last generation is being rewritten in real time, as young workers discover the fields touted as elite stepping stones may now conceal the highest risk of displacement. So the old line between mental and manual labor no longer describes the economy accurately. Automation does not care about collars, titles, or prestige. It follows patterns, repetition, and large data trails, whether in spreadsheets, legal research databases, or production schedules. This reframing is more unsettling than the earlier forecasts because it undercuts expectations across the income spectrum. Papers published only a few years ago predicted blue-collar displacement before white-collar impact. Now evidence shows both unfolding in tandem, with data-rich sectors often overtaking physical industries in speed of replacement. The result is not uniform devastation, but constant recalibration, where the pace of change leaves workers in every field questioning what's next. If the office, the law firm, or the financial institution is no longer safe, then what remains? And more worrying, what does this reshaping mean for the systems meant to keep automation in check? Why safety failed in real time? We assumed artificial intelligence would be a tool to lighten the load, save time, and take menial work off our plates. The expectation was that software would remove repetitive tasks so humans could focus on bigger, more creative decisions. Yet in practice, the last year has highlighted something different. The more we hand over responsibility to algorithms, the more visible their flaws become. Instead of smoother living, news stories keep surfacing about systems discriminating in hiring, autonomous programs misfiring in public spaces, and AI chat services generating harmful or misleading answers. What was supposed to reduce mistakes often feels like a new generator of risks, unpredictable, harder to see coming, and difficult to stop once in motion. Hiring platforms illustrate this breakdown clearly. Companies invested in automated screening with the idea that bias could finally be eliminated. A neutral program would assess experience and skills without being influenced by background. But because those models learned from historical hiring data, they inherited existing inequalities and scaled them up. Studies and legal cases showed applicants excluded not for lack of ability, but because the software had absorbed patterns that penalized certain demographics. An AI that was marketed as unbiased ended up reproducing discrimination with greater consistency, reinforcing the very barriers it was supposed to remove. Transportation provides another cautionary example. Self-driving technologies entered roads under the promise of being safer than human drivers, but accidents made headlines across the last 2 years. Independent investigations into these incidents revealed system blind spots, trouble recognizing irregular road markings, difficulty interpreting unexpected pedestrian movement, or failures in poor light. These were the same edge cases safety specialists had raised years earlier, but in 2025 they are playing out in real-world conditions, sometimes with tragic consequences. The lesson isn't that autonomy can never improve safety, but that real deployments prove the systems are still brittle when faced with complexity outside training data. The public then sees direct evidence of those failures, and reassurance about statistics matters little when rare but catastrophic errors remain possible. Generative AI and hallucination errors have become the other major safety front. A chatbot recommending an imaginary restaurant seems trivial, yet when professionals build on that same functionality, the risks multiply. Courts have already seen cases where lawyers submitted filings that cited non-existent rulings supplied by an AI assistant. Health apps driven by language and rules engines have produced treatment suggestions misaligned with accepted medical standards. Because the outputs are fluent and confident, users often fail to catch the mistake until it's too late. This erosion of trust has grown from early warning signs. Microsoft's Tay chatbot back in 2016 spiraled into harmful and offensive speech within hours of being released on Twitter, an early indication of how quickly generative systems can move into dangerous territory. More recently, independent testing performed by researchers found multi-turn dialogues with modern AI chat services produced harmful responses in nearly half of tested categories, especially when prompts involved nuanced or sensitive issues. These results show the limits of safety techniques, which often catch obvious single-turn problems, but struggle under realistic, extended interactions. The pattern is consistent. Capabilities expand rapidly, while precautions lag. Multiple research bodies have underlined that models scale faster than oversight. Safety fields like alignment research, interpretability, and risk testing progress incrementally, but model size and reach surge ahead every quarter. This growing gap leaves users with powerful, accessible tools before safeguards are mature. RAND and other organizations point out that capability frontiers are being set by corporate race dynamics, not by safety confidence, widening the imbalance with every release cycle. Case studies across industries drive the point home. In policing, facial recognition software has flagged false matches, placing innocent people under suspicion with little recourse until the errors were challenged. In finance, trading algorithms have set off flash crashes after misinterpreting patterns, erasing huge values before human monitors could react. What should act as guardrails in these environments often collapses into reactive crisis management, where oversight arrives only after consequences are already in motion. The absurdity of the technology's overreach adds to the sense of unease. Imagining a smart appliance that not only times toast, but also injects unsolicited advice on managing personal finances may seem humorous, but it captures a real drift. Large models are designed without inherent boundaries about context. They answer as if they are authorities regardless of domain, whether the task is bread, budgets, or mental health. Without clear limitations, AI gives outputs in areas where accountability doesn't match the seriousness of the stakes. The result is a blur of responsibility. Companies disclaim liability, users shoulder the impact, and the algorithm simply issues another confident response. What deepens concern is the rhythm of rollout itself. New systems are promoted as groundbreaking, adoption spreads rapidly, then cracks appear when unpredictable errors show up in real contexts. Companies try to patch issues, but by the time fixes arrive, the product has already been extended into new territory. The constant release cycle guarantees safety measures are always reactive. Users adapt to frequent mistakes, and instead of demanding reliability, they start to tolerate risks as if they are inevitable trade-offs. That normalization is itself dangerous. It conditions people to lower standards of trust in critical systems. Inside corporations, safety-minded caution often gets reframed. Failures are labeled bugs, not structural risks. Development groups treat them as temporary hurdles to iron out, while executives point to market performance. Marketing language highlights speed, affordability, and productivity while minimizing stories of bias, accidents, or fabricated information. The utility is real: cheaper processes, faster results, wider access, but the human costs are shouldered elsewhere. It is the job seeker rejected by a model's hidden logic, the driver or pedestrian injured at the intersection, the professional humiliated by false outputs who pays the immediate price while companies advance their narrative of progress. Experts disagree on where this arc ends. Some, like Dr. Yampolskiy, point to existential outcomes, speculating that uncontrolled superintelligence could even threaten humanity. Others argue those scenarios, while possible, remain uncertain and contested. The consensus, however, is less dramatic but no less pressing. Every sector adopting AI quickly is exposing real people to risks the safeguards cannot yet contain. The problem is not a hypothetical apocalypse, but a grinding erosion of trust, legal systems, and accountability structures happening in the present. So why does this cycle of fragile safety persist? The answer lies in incentives, testing gaps, and technical limits. Safety hasn't collapsed because leaders ignore it outright, but because priorities push toward speed and deployment long before standards can catch up. Independent studies and repeated public failures show this clearly. Our ability to build grows faster than our ability to restrain. And this imbalance means that, for now, mistakes and oversights are built into the daily reality of AI adoption. Safety fails not because no one cares, but because the forces around the technology make failure the default condition. That raises an uncomfortable question. If the flaws are this visible, why do decision makers continue to accelerate deployment anyway? The next piece turns to that exact dynamic: what the people in charge know, what they ignore, and why the drive to lead outweighs concerns about safety. Why CEOs still don't care. The contradictions in AI safety aren't happening in secret labs or because leaders are unaware of the risks. They persist because of how corporate incentives are structured. Executives know about the headlines, the bias exposés, the accident reports, and the chatbot blunders. None of this is hidden. What matters is how those facts collide with quarterly targets and investor expectations. Leaders publicly endorse safety, but private pressures push for speed instead. That tension explains why safety measures are announced loudly but enforced slowly, if at all. At the core is the incentive system. Every decision is shaped by financial momentum, returns to shareholders, venture funding tied to growth metrics, and the competitive drive to be first. A recent PwC survey of CEOs illustrates the scope of this pressure. About half of respondents listed AI integration as a top priority for business transformation in 2025. That statistic reflects how executives frame AI less as a long-term challenge and more as an immediate race they cannot afford to lose. Once one company releases a high-powered system, rivals risk reputational damage if they fall behind. The logic works like gravity. Investors demand proof of acceleration, which in turn chains leaders to a timeline that leaves little room for caution. Even when leaders appear thoughtful in interviews, their actions tell a different story. Safe-sounding phrases like responsible scaling become standard talking points, but development continues along the same accelerating curve. Industry journalism has documented cases where technical staff raised concerns about rushing launches, only to be sidelined as executives pressed forward to meet strategic deadlines. The pattern is not one of ignorance, but of conscious trade-off. Managers accept the risks on paper and still decide that commercial advantage outweighs the chance of failure or harm. Sam Altman has embodied this contradiction in public. He has spoken about the dangers of unrestrained AI, yet simultaneously championed projects like WorldCoin, which rely on mass biometric data collection. a step into a market defined by sensitivity and surveillance. His dual stance highlights the strange rhythm of leadership in AI. One day warning about social risks, the next expanding tools into riskier domains under banners like inclusion and innovation. It's not unique to him. It is how the field as a whole functions when financial and competitive incentive structures dominate. Tesla's push toward humanoid robotics shows another side of the problem. Official statements underline safety and oversight, but in practice development has only accelerated, with each prototype presented as a symbolic victory in a race to dominate the robotics market. Research teams still grapple with fundamentals, balance, environment adaptation, coordination, yet the message emphasized in conferences is who demonstrates progress fastest. The implicit rule is obvious: demonstrate capability even if serious safety testing lags behind. That performance-driven cycle then pressures competing firms not to pause, even when their own engineers might prefer a slower, more deliberate path. The outcomes often border on absurd. Marketing departments promote products as if each release is the most responsible innovation yet. Press conferences mix warnings about risks with bragging about new rollouts that clearly extend those same risks. It feels like watching a company fuel a fire while celebrating the innovation of inventing a safer fire extinguisher. The market rewards this contradiction anyway. Stock prices respond positively to bold deployment, not to announcements about delays or internal risk reviews. What leadership says about responsibility matters less than what they actually deliver on stage or in quarterly earnings calls. To understand why this contradiction persists, we need to look at where growth potential still exists. Traditional technology markets like smartphones and PCs are saturated. Margins for improvement are shrinking. AI, by contrast, carries the promise of reshaping everything: productivity, logistics, media, and finance. To pull ahead in this environment means not only new revenue, but also setting global standards and building the platforms that everyone else will depend on. If a company in the United States hesitates, leaders fear counterparts in China, South Korea, or Europe will accelerate and define terms before Americans can catch up. Ethical hesitation under these rules looks less like caution and more like surrender. The culture inside these companies reflects those priorities. Staff speak frequently about alignment, guardrails, or interpretability, but everyone knows the deadlines are dictated by external competition and investor timelines. Engineers can raise hands to flag limits, but no one wants to bear the stigma of causing a delay. In environments structured around outpacing opponents, slowing down is tantamount to career derailment. For that reason, even committed safety researchers find their work sidelined, reframed as exploratory rather than critical. Government policy adds another layer. Defense contracts and innovation grants often reward bold moves in automation and machine learning. State-level encouragement becomes another accelerant, signaling to corporate leaders that speed is not just accepted, but often incentivized outright. If executives believed they could press pause without global consequences, they might at least weigh the option. But geopolitics transforms every delay into a vulnerability, reinforcing the choice to advance regardless of incomplete safeguards. When systems fail in public view, executives frame the incidents as isolated misfires, a self-driving crash. The narrative becomes a minor blip compared to the broader record of safety improvements. A biased hiring output, that is explained as a training data problem to be adjusted next release. A bot that hallucinated legal precedents, an error in fine-tuning to be patched quickly. Each instance is recast as a bug, never as a symptom of systemic fragility. Building and deploying remain the constants. Pausing to reconsider remains the unspoken rejection. This is not because leaders dismiss safety entirely. Many fund safety research, sponsor conferences, and discuss risks in public. But when measured against investor calls or competitive threats, safety work shrinks into a side note. In quarterly balance sheets, phrases like responsible AI initiatives appear at the margins, while projections about market growth dominate the narrative. From a financial perspective, an AI model that misbehaves occasionally but expands market share is more valuable than a perfectly cautious rollout that arrives too late. The net result is a remarkable consistency across the industry. Leaders acknowledge the risks, they promote responsibility, and they release anyway. To the public, this rhythm reveals how much market pressure outweighs words. Every investor report is a reminder that safety remains a distant secondary priority compared to rapid domination of one of the largest wealth-creating technologies in recent history. Survey data and industry reporting both show the same underlying truth. The rhetoric of responsibility is real, but it does not alter the incentive systems that set deadlines and determine funding. The The PwC study is a snapshot of that mindset. AI is treated as non-negotiable, a race that must be run regardless of collateral issues. For workers and the public, that matters because it clarifies why new rollouts keep arriving despite all the warning signs. In simple terms, public safety talk does not automatically change the market incentives that drive product timelines. And those incentives affect more than abstract corporate strategy. They shape the stability of entire professions, altering who remains employable and who is pushed aside. As firms compete to deploy faster, the consequences are absorbed by ordinary people who must navigate the fallout: financial, social, and emotional. The risks extend beyond industries and headlines, and increasingly into people's day-to-day lives. That reality sets the stage for what many are experiencing right now: the personal costs of being left behind in an economy that prizes acceleration over protection. While executives debate market share and positioning, workers and families are the ones absorbing the shockwaves. And the heaviest weight does not always show up in balance sheets. It shows up in what unemployment does to identity, confidence, and mental health. The psychological cost of vanishing work. The deeper cost of AI-driven layoffs doesn't show up in profit reports or company statements. It shows up in how people live day to day. The paycheck matters, but what vanishes with it is just as important: structure, purpose, and identity. For most of modern history, work did more than sustain livelihoods. It gave people a way to define themselves, to claim standing within their communities, and to map out their contributions to society. In 2025, as entire job categories destabilize more quickly than expected, the psychological strain is becoming as pressing as the economic one. Teachers illustrate this tension vividly. For many, their work wasn't simply employment. It was a mission tied to guiding students and building futures. When institutions tighten budgets and experiment with AI tutoring systems marketed as personalized education, teachers discover that skills honed across decades are suddenly symbolized as something disposable, replaced by an app. It's not just income that disappears, but the role itself: the daily interactions, the authority of the classroom, the rituals that gave meaning. Packing up an office after 20 years of service isn't just a logistical process. To a teacher who once introduced themselves proudly by their profession, it feels like their entire sense of usefulness is being dismantled. Programmers experience something different but equally destabilizing. A decade earlier, governments and employers promoted coding as the future-proof route, a firm skill set in a digital era. Boot camps, retraining programs, and degrees poured time, money, and expectations into preparing a workforce for jobs thought to be safe for decades. Thousands internalized programming as identity, the prestigious language of the future. Then generative AI systems began writing functional code in moments, producing outputs that stunned audiences and triggered workforce cuts. For a young developer with debt and only a few years of experience, layoffs carry an existential undertone: the thought that their foundation might dissolve before they even turn 30. Career planning feels hollow when your hard-won skill exists inside a machine that functions faster and cheaper. Drivers, too, are caught in a parallel unraveling. For truck drivers and rideshare operators, work is defined not only by wages, but by endurance, discipline, and control of the road. Decades behind the wheel become a narrative of professional pride. When early automation began to appear in transport fleets, many see their life's rhythm preparing to stop suddenly. The transition isn't a matter of retraining for another office job. For someone whose identity was shaped on the road, the loss of control isn't technical, it's personal, a dismantling of selfhood as real as the destruction of savings. Psychological research has long reinforced the connection between unemployment and mental health. Studies link job loss to depression, anxiety, and even worsening physical health outcomes. The connection isn't new, but the speed of AI-driven restructuring makes the shock sharper. Factory declines in the 20th century often stretched across decades, giving people time to brace and reorient. Today, new AI launches can erase tasks overnight, turning cautionary headlines into immediate crisis. The St. Louis Federal Reserve's analysis, for example, notes that between 2022 and 2025, occupations adopting generative AI most intensively have shown higher unemployment rates than similar fields with less adoption. It grounds what many already feel. Psychological strain is tied not to vague fears of automation, but to actual job losses accelerating in specific sectors. Caught in this speed, workers struggle to adjust. The bewilderment transforms basic financial questions into existential worries. Instead of merely asking, "How can I pay bills this month?" displaced employees often find themselves asking, "If my role no longer exists, who am I?" That second question can consume more energy than the first, eating at confidence and stability across entire communities. Young adults coming of age in this time feel the burden most acutely. They are the ones who watched parents preach stability, only for those very paths to collapse within their lifetimes. Now, as they juggle student debts, high rents, and contract positions, they enter industries where their jobs may vanish before they can even build resumes. Career centers scrambling to provide guidance sound outdated when the concept of career itself looks unstable. On social networks, graduates post stories of pivoting 2 or 3 times before signing their first full-year lease. Instead of optimism, the prevailing mood for this generation is fatigue and resignation, a sense of running on an escalator that always pulls backward. Humor creeps in as one way to cope. Laid-off workers joke about being encouraged to try mindfulness apps or receiving push notifications from the very AI tools that eliminated their positions. Imagine losing a customer service job to a chatbot, only to receive daily motivational messages from that same chatbot assuring you to stay strong. The absurdity makes people laugh, but the laughter is edged with bitterness, a kind of gallows humor that grips displaced communities. These psychological ripples don't stop at individual workers. Families and neighborhoods absorb the strain. Parents often feel shame about no longer being able to provide. Children internalize the anxiety of a household destabilized by sudden cuts. Professions that once carried cultural meaning hollow out quickly, erasing not just paychecks but shared pride. Schools once built on generations of teachers now instruct students with reduced staff, leaving children to wonder whether their parents' careers are still worth pursuing. Skilled workers steer their own kids away from the jobs they once celebrated, rewriting community values in real time. Society's lingering cultural norms about work amplify the distress. Status and value remain tethered to professional identity, even as AI undermines those roles. Someone stripped of a profession loses not only income, but also recognition. Side hustles and online projects try to fill the void, but they rarely carry the same standing. The mismatch leaves displaced individuals searching for worth in spaces that feel temporary or hollow. Some drown in overwork through piecemeal gigs, intensifying fatigue. Others retreat completely, avoiding both career ambition and social ties. Neither outcome provides the stability once symbolized by a career path. Stigma deepens the challenge. Being replaced by AI is often wrongly framed as personal failure, a lack of adaptation, rather than a structural shift outside workers' control. Displaced people shrink away from communities rather than open up, fearing the label of being obsolete. Well-meaning friends suggest retraining, unaware that retraining programs are themselves already disrupted. The suggestion to just learn something new piles frustration onto exhaustion. Those who did pivot once or twice feel betrayed to see their new start vanish again in real time. Some analysts and industry figures even predict far greater distress ahead, suggesting that if current trends hold, large swathes of entry-level knowledge work may evaporate. Leaders such as Dario Amodei and others have issued warnings about major disruptions to white-collar employment within the next decade. Whether or not those exact numbers come true, the projections alone shape psychology. Workers hear them, internalize them, and absorb the sense of instability even before layoffs strike their own desks. What emerges is not just scattered hardship, but a psychological climate spreading almost as widely as the technology itself. Anxiety, depression, identity loss, feelings of obsolescence. It adds up to a cultural phenomenon where the definition of self through work is dissolving. The economic displacement is tragic enough. But the deeper crisis is that millions of people wake up unsure of how to measure their value in a society where their professions may not survive the year. If you're watching this and the description feels personal, the next section will matter. We'll examine the roles and places still holding out against automation and map practical steps for navigating them. Because not every industry and not every region follows the same trajectory, and that unevenness is now shaping who feels the brunt of AI's impact and who still has time to adapt. Regional unevenness, why AI hits harder depending on where you live. Why artificial intelligence seems to erase jobs in some places almost overnight, while other regions remain relatively untouched, has less to do with the technology itself and more to do with geography, infrastructure, and policy. AI systems are globally available, but the pace of adoption is anything but uniform. In certain cities, industries topple in months, while elsewhere, change creeps in slowly. What shapes the difference are 3 core factors: how quickly firms adopt new systems, the structure of local economies, and the rules governments enforce or delay. The result is a global workforce moving at different speeds, all while grappling with the same underlying technology. In tech hubs like Silicon Valley or major financial centers in New York and London, adoption runs fast because companies already have the essentials: high-capacity networks, access to vast datasets, and executives racing to cut costs through automation. In these regions, entry-level office roles in finance, publishing, or software engineering can disappear with shocking speed. Managers spot potential savings, integrate models into workflows, and within a quarter employees' watch positions shrink from full strength to half capacity, then fade almost entirely. Here, the gap between laboratory advance and workplace replacement is measured not in years but in months. Workers in these places feel the sharpest shocks, not because the machines are inherently more powerful, but because the environment lets them spread instantly. By contrast, smaller economies without dense investment corridors or technical infrastructure often hang on to traditional labor longer. In regions where new systems are expensive to maintain, businesses hesitate to replace workers. Sometimes governments add further breaks with protective labor policies or subsidies, preventing a sudden shift. A rural farmer may read about autonomous tractors in trade publications, but still drives the same machine as last decade, because parts and authorized repair networks are unavailable locally. The internet might give theoretical access to every AI tool, but real use depends on whether enough support exists to make adoption practical. Geography and infrastructure carve deep divides in what people experience, even under a single global cloud architecture. One clear example of this unevenness is found in customer service industries. The Philippines became a global call center hub, building hundreds of thousands of jobs around outsourced customer support. For years, those roles seemed secure because they relied on tone, empathy, and language nuance. But as conversational AI matured, overseas corporations began shifting contracts toward automated systems capable of answering routine questions at scale. Because the outsourcing model is designed to respond to global corporate demand, the shift hit hard and fast. Workers trained extensively in communication skills suddenly found themselves outcompeted by subscription-based software priced below a human team's salary. That moment became a national labor crisis, illustrating how whole sectors tightly bound to global supply chains can unravel swiftly when clients embrace automation. In the United States, the sharper industrial shock came through manufacturing. Robotics had long been a factor, but new AI-driven systems accelerated by adapting on the assembly line in real time. Machines handle irregular shapes, adjust to variations, and work continuously without fatigue. Communities in the Midwest and South, once anchored by human-run factories, now face automation hollowing out payrolls. Towns watch warehouses and plants go lights out with only skeleton human staff, creating resentment when they see similar jobs still present in slower adopting regions. The uneven rollout highlights that automation does not arrive everywhere at once. Even within one country, geography and capital concentration determine who feels it first. Europe adds another layer with regulation. The European Union has pursued what it calls the AI Act, introducing guardrails and compliance structures before mass deployment. In practice, this means slower releases in sensitive areas. Corporations hesitate to roll out experimental tools when they must navigate lengthy approval processes or face penalties for bias. For workers, that caution acts as a buffer. Jobs stretch further into the future, but it comes at a cost. Businesses complain about competitive disadvantage compared to American or Asian counterparts, and employees know the protections provide only temporary delay. Regulatory oversight buys time, but it does not stop adoption. It only reschedules its arrival. Asia's landscape stands apart in its intensity. Countries like South Korea, China, and Japan treat automation as a leapfrogging opportunity. Entire logistical sectors integrate AI at scale, often with state encouragement. Retail, manufacturing, and transit see rapid deployment, with citizens adapting quickly to shared spaces where robots and humans mix. Resistance tends to be lower, partly because modernization and competitiveness are emphasized by national policy. For individual workers, this means reduced chances of gradual transitions. Instead of a slow drift, roles transform in step with government-driven timetables. People adapt less by resisting, and more by acknowledging the systems will arrive regardless of local hesitation. Across these regions, a deeper pattern explains why certain industries collapse first: the data paradox. Jobs fall fastest where abundant, clean digital records already exist to train AI systems. Software engineering, financial analysis, and customer support all fit this description. They generate structured data, repeated patterns, and clear success metrics. By contrast, sectors like construction, on-site healthcare, or skilled trades face more friction. Their data is fragmented, protected by privacy rules, or messy because of physical unpredictability. A hospital ward cannot be standardized as easily as a dataset of tax returns, and a renovation project rarely mirrors another closely enough for easy automation. Workers in those fields may see slower job erosion not because they're untouchable, but because their environments resist conversion into clean, algorithm-friendly learning material. For individuals, these uneven rollouts carry practical consequences. If you live in a region where firms sit at the front of adoption, think downtown technology hubs or financial corridors, expect faster transitions and prepare for new roles to become volatile quickly. In slower-moving regions or more regulated economies, change arrives later, but the shadow of disruption remains. Planning means recognizing whether your work environment is on the leading edge or still sheltered, then acting in line with that timeline. Geography, more than most people expect, remains a decisive filter over how AI alters a livelihood. Humor sometimes captures this divide best. Walk through a central business district in one city, and you might see autonomous delivery robots circling sidewalks or restaurants testing robotic servers. 2 hours away, a smaller town might still struggle with updating payment systems or managing basic connectivity. The contrast is striking. Progress and delay coexisting side by side, each shaping local expectations. Both environments feel the weight of AI, but on staggered timetables that affect not just jobs, but also how people imagine their futures. The psychological weight of uneven adoption also differs by region. In hotspots where change accelerates, workers face whiplash as roles transform at breakneck speeds. The stress lies in constant adaptation, rapid reskilling, and the grief of seeing industries uprooted in real time. In slower adopting societies, anxiety takes a different form, dread and anticipation. People follow news elsewhere, knowing eventually the same tools will arrive. They worry not because jobs have already gone, but because they see the countdown ticking. Whether through sudden shocks or long delays, both environments strain mental health in different but equally significant ways. What globalization once seemed to promise, a smooth, unified spread of technology, is not borne out here. Instead, artificial intelligence exposes the potency of geography even in a digital era. National laws, infrastructure strength, and cultural openness shape adoption as much as raw technical capability. For one worker, disruption may come tomorrow. For another, it may take years. Both outcomes are part of the same global story, but the timing is entirely uneven. This uneven distribution leaves workers with more questions than answers. Some look to corporate leaders for responsibility, but corporate incentives rarely prioritize local stability. Others look to governments. Yet so far, while the rhetoric about bold action has grown louder, the responses on the ground remain patchy at best. That disconnect between political promise and practical delivery will determine who really absorbs the pressure as the wave of AI continues to spread. What governments are actually doing and not doing. Policy responses to artificial intelligence differ widely, and the variation explains much of why workers feel either shielded or exposed. Some governments emphasize regulation, others lean on voluntary frameworks, and a few push rapid adoption zones where experimentation happens at scale. The European Union's AI Act stands out as a concrete attempt at regulation. The United States chooses a lighter voluntary approach, and China pushes state-directed pilots. Each strategy reflects different political priorities, but all share the same tension. The speed of technological rollout consistently outruns the pace of policy. The EU's AI Act is often presented as the most ambitious effort. Officials describe it as a tiered framework, placing the strictest obligations on applications classified as high risk. This was not just a proposal. The Act entered into force in 2024, with enforcement designed to phase in gradually over the following years. In principle, this creates a rulebook that distinguishes between lower-risk consumer products and more sensitive systems in fields like medicine, law enforcement, or employment. In practice, the staggered rollout means that enforcement lags adoption. Companies release powerful models now, while oversight bodies continue drafting detailed standards. That delay leaves workers vulnerable during the transition, even as policymakers emphasize that the system is building toward full coverage. The U.S. approach diverges sharply. Rather than codifying legal obligations, agencies issue guidance that relies on voluntary compliance. Corporations are asked to adopt ethical best practices, audit their own systems, and use responsible deployment standards, but the guidance remains optional. A company can roll out an experimental AI tool, discover problems later, and promise to refine procedures without ever facing mandatory penalties. The rationale is clear: protect innovation, maintain competitive advantage, and keep American firms from losing ground abroad. For investors, the flexibility fuels growth. For workers exposed to displacement or safety failures, the absence of binding rules can feel like abdication. The government publicizes principles, but the burden of enforcement largely rests with the same companies racing to commercialize. China exemplifies the opposite extreme, relying on highly managed, state-driven deployment. Central planners designate trial zones, where AI can be tested at scale in real-world conditions. These might involve city districts where autonomous logistics are authorized, or regional pilots where biometric surveillance is integrated fully. The effect is rapid adoption. Entire sectors can shift almost overnight under top-down direction. But workers receive little preparation or protection when these shifts occur. Social safety isn't the priority. Demonstration of technological capacity is. For global observers, the model shows what acceleration looks like when government incentives suppress resistance. Compared to Europe's extended debates and America's voluntary posture, China's approach represents immediate large-scale shifts in both advancement and displacement. Each model has strengths and weaknesses. The EU provides structured oversight but moves slowly. The US prizes corporate freedom but leaves gaps in accountability. China accelerates rollouts but sidelines individual protections. Across all approaches, the most pressing issue, what to do about large-scale unemployment, still receives less attention than bias, safety, or transparency. Politicians speak about protecting workers, but systems sized to meet potential displacement scenarios remain rare. Instead of robust universal protections, the policy landscape is dominated by regulation, retraining pilots, and tightly scoped income support programs. Analysts point out that this toolkit could prove adequate if job disruption is limited, but would be grossly insufficient if longer-term worst-case predictions materialize. Global research paints a more nuanced picture of what governments may actually face. Goldman Sachs, for example, has projected that AI could cause a modest rise in short-term unemployment, but also forecasts longer-run benefits to productivity that might absorb losses. By contrast, PwC's jobs barometer reports show mixed results. In many industries, wages rise where AI augments work rather than replaces it outright, but displacement still spikes in roles that rely on repetitive processes. These analyses underscore that outcomes will not be uniform. Policy needs to address rapid, uneven effects across regions and industries. Yet so far, most state interventions remain general. Income support experiments illustrate the limitations. Universal basic income trials are frequently cited as forward-looking policy, but they occur at tiny scale compared to the disruption risk. Localized tests in Europe or North America cover a few thousand participants, while industries tied to automation involve millions of workers. Economists value the data, yet communities losing entire employment bases remain untouched. Scaling has not matched rhetoric. Policymakers defend gradualism, but workers living the disruption experience the mismatch firsthand. Governments also promote retraining as a central solution. Programs often highlight digital skills, coding, or AI support functions as pathways into resilience. At first glance, this looks logical, but as the last few years have shown, many of these very skill sets are also subject to automation. Early retraining pipelines that emphasized programming or call center adaptability no longer feel secure in 2025. Workers who completed state-sponsored courses a few years earlier are again competing against automated systems now doing that work. The result is frustration. Policies designed for stability turn temporary, leaving citizens chasing an ever-shifting horizon. Despite these shortcomings, it is too simple to say governments do nothing. Regulatory attempts are active, phased, and real. Income tests and training schemes are operating across several continents. The problem is proportionality. Measures are not scaled to match the disruption headlines warn about. Experts criticize the contrast between forecasts of mass automation and preparation limited to pilot schemes. Citizens who lose jobs see paperwork, task force reports, or regulatory hearings rather than actionable safety nets. Frustration grows not from absence but from insufficiency. Officials often defend limited rollout as pragmatic. They argue that imposing too much intervention could stall innovation and cede advantage to rivals. This rationale echoes the same reasoning used in boardrooms. It's about competing in a race. Governments may speak about protecting workers, but underneath, strategies orient toward accelerating local tech sectors. From that perspective, worker displacement is viewed as collateral to maintain global position. People hear reassurances from podiums, but when redistribution or income support is considered, it arrives piecemeal. That tension feeds public mistrust. Citizens face layoffs and economic uncertainty, while governments highlight regulatory achievements that take years to phase in. A family experiencing sudden job loss does not gain much from knowing which category Brussels has assigned to high-risk applications. What they need is basic protection, and what they receive is a new committee announcement. This gap makes survival strategies individual rather than collective. Households cobble solutions from multiple gigs, shared housing, or rapid relocation. Across borders, most citizens adapt locally within families and communities, while national support lags behind. For those watching closely, the lesson is clear. Policy matters and outcomes vary by jurisdiction. Countries under EU oversight may face stricter regulations that slow certain deployments, while US workers see AI enter markets faster under voluntary standards. In China, acceleration continues in designated zones, reshaping industries without much warning. For anyone charting their future, the practical takeaway is to monitor which policy regime surrounds your own work. Regional rules do not just affect corporate strategies, they shape an individual's own risk of disruption. When measured globally, the state of government response can be summed up simply. Meaningful steps have begun, but the scale of preparation falls short of the scale of disruption. How this imbalance plays out will vary by geography, but in every case, ordinary workers stand in the gap between rapid deployment and slow-moving safeguards, which leaves a pressing question. If many jobs across sectors and regions are destabilizing at once, which ones are actually managing to hold their ground? The 5 jobs that refuse to die. When so many industries are shrinking under AI pressure, it becomes just as important to notice which ones are holding steady. Some jobs not only remain but seem insulated by their nature, roles where machines struggle either because the environment is too complex, the trust required too high, or the cultural expectation too human to automate away. These are not guaranteed safe havens forever, but in 2025, they stand out as the 5 types of work that resist automation more strongly than others. The first group is manual trades: plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, construction repair. For years, these were described as low-prestige options compared with office work, yet in practice they remain among the most resilient professions. Research from organizations like PwC and the World Economic Forum consistently identifies construction and other hands-on fields as low-exposure areas for AI. The reason is technical. AI thrives on structured, abundant digital records, but homes, pipes, and electrical systems rarely follow uniform blueprints. Every repair job carries unique variables, and work often happens in tight, unpredictable spaces where current robotics falls short. Academic studies also highlight that physical dexterity in messy conditions is an unsolved frontier. So when a pipe bursts unexpectedly, no algorithm substitutes for the worker dismantling and reassembling parts in real space. Here, resilience is not built on prestige or efficiency, but on the stubborn irregularities of the physical world. The second survivor lies in healthcare, especially frontline and care-related roles. While AI is reshaping diagnostics and medical logistics, many health jobs remain buffered because of fragmented or legally protected data. Analysts note that healthcare adoption lags behind other industries precisely because patient information is scattered across systems and protected by strict privacy rules. The ECRI Institute even listed untested AI-based tools as safety hazards in healthcare, reinforcing why cautious integration is the norm. In this environment, professions requiring presence, nurses, aides, elder care workers, sit apart from automation risk. U.S. Career Institute surveys rank nurse practitioners among the lowest-risk jobs, with some projections showing significant growth through the decade. In practice, you cannot outsource physical examination, patient monitoring, or hands-on care to a predictive model without breaching both trust and regulation. Care systems may bring AI into record-keeping or triage, but the core human labor remains essential. These roles endure not because technology ignores them, but because technological and ethical friction reinforces their necessity. Mental health therapy forms the third category. Chatbots may advertise as wellness companions, and some people do use them for light support, but serious mental health counseling has stayed firmly in human hands. Research consistently underscores that therapy works not simply because of information, but because of empathy, interpretation, and relational trust. Clients respond to tone, pauses, facial expressions, and presence, all aspects machines simulate poorly. Survey work further suggests that people remain deeply skeptical of trusting sensitive trauma recovery to code-driven systems with no accountability. Regulations also matter. Professional associations and health systems require certification and human oversight that no public AI has met. In an environment of rising stress and displacement, demand for therapy grows precisely as automation struggles to replicate it. Machine outputs can mimic sympathetic phrasing, but the lived reality of being heard by another human remains irreplaceable. The fourth zone involves care roles tied to deep trust, childcare and elder care. These services demand responsibility that societies hesitate to outsource. Parents may use AI to supplement learning games, but they still rely on people when leaving a child in care for a full day. Elder support is much the same. Machines might monitor or assist with mobility, but the emotional reassurance of human presence is what families trust. regulation reinforces this. Licensing frameworks for daycare and eldercare centers place explicit limits on non-human substitution. Liability is also too high. If a child or senior is harmed under automated supervision, fallout for companies would be severe. Real adoption, therefore, is confined to supportive functions, with core responsibilities held by trained staff. The absence of full substitution reflects both human requirements for trust and the legal structures designed to enforce them. These conditions mean caregivers remain vital, not because their jobs look futuristic, but because their work cannot be reduced to data without breaching safety and cultural norms. Finally, there's the wide, unpredictable space of creative and online-based work, artisan crafts in the physical world and eccentric, human-driven creators online. Studies and labor analyses from sources like Paybump, Fortune, and We Are Developers consistently list creative work among categories that remain harder to automate. Handmade furniture, original art, and custom jewelry emphasize imperfection as authenticity, increasing their cultural value at a time when mass automation produces flawless but generic designs. For digital creators, resilience emerges from the authenticity paradox. Audiences gravitate toward voices that feel unscripted and flawed. Viewers know AI can generate endless streams of polished clips, but the appeal of real people lies in quirks that break smoothness, stumbles, humor, missteps. Even in digital media, where automation seems inevitable, audiences carve space for work defined by personality rather than perfection. These roles endure not because AI cannot try, but because audiences reject replacements when they sense artificiality. Taken together, these 5 areas, manual trades, healthcare and care work, therapy, social trust services like childcare and elder care, and creative or eccentric content creation, demonstrate resilience. What links them is not efficiency, but qualities AI struggles to copy. Dexterity in unpredictable physical environments, trust built through regulation and empathy, and cultural appetite for genuine human presence. One small data point frames this clearly. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics lists nurse practitioners, a healthcare field with low automation risk, among the fastest-growing jobs of the decade. Evidence like this shows that even within widespread disruption, growth lines tilt toward human-dependent roles. The pattern here is clear. Jobs that involve messy physical environments, deep human judgment, regulated trust, or cultural taste are the hardest for AI to replace. They resist automation not because they are untouched by technology, but because their nature exposes the limits of automation. They are not safe forever, but today they stand out as likely survivors. This carries a strange irony compared with the messaging workers received in past decades. Career advisors pushed people into coding and information processing, while manual trades and so-called unskilled fields were framed as fallback options. In 2025, the inversion is striking. Electricians, carpenters, nurses, therapists, and content creators hold out, while the graduates of expensive technical programs find themselves wondering where the ground went. It reorders what society counts as resilience and status. These reversals also highlight how predictions repeatedly overlooked culture as much as technology. Warnings about automation assumed people would adopt whatever system was most efficient. Reality shows families still prioritize trust in care, patients in therapy prioritize human empathy, and audiences online prioritize personality. Machines replace much, but they cannot easily replace what people choose to value. Those cultural anchors make the difference between roles that collapse and roles that remain viable. For workers, the recognition that some fields endure provides an opening. The story is not total collapse but uneven pressure. Survivors exist, but they exist for specific reasons embedded in the work itself. That means people positioning themselves for stability need to match those reasons, move where trust, presence, and improvisation still shield against automation. The prospect may feel narrow, given the scale of displacement elsewhere, but identifying these holdouts proves that resilience is possible in the middle of disruption. It shifts the focus from abstract warnings to practical questions. What work remains viable and what qualities preserve it? Those qualities, physical dexterity, authenticity, empathy, regulation, are not mysterious. They can form the basis of strategies moving forward. And understanding them sets the stage for how people might protect themselves now, while change accelerates all around. Strategies to protect yourself. Protecting yourself in a landscape shaped by automation requires deliberate action. The story so far has centered on erosion, roles pulled apart, policies stalling, and incentives rewarding speed. That backdrop matters, but it doesn't mean individual plans are worthless. It means survival depends on building strategies that spread risk, anticipate instability, and create options before the ground shifts. No one choice guarantees permanence, but there are practical moves that reduce exposure and expand resilience in the most uncertain years of work many people have ever faced. Diversifying income has become one of the clearest defensive positions. The old image of work, one full-time job as the anchor, is fraying under pressure. Wages still come primarily from jobs, but no single stream can be counted on without backup. If a company automates entire departments with a quarterly update, workers with just one paycheck and no alternative face immediate collapse. Spreading income across projects, side contracts, or micro-businesses creates flexibility. For instance, a carpenter doing traditional remodeling might also teach online tutorials or sell handmade items locally. A developer may keep a salaried position, but also build freelance tools or consult on implementation for small firms. Even part-time gigs in unrelated sectors help, because survival in a volatile market is about redundancy. The principle is simple: if one stream vanishes, another cushions the fall. It is less a plan to grow wealth aggressively and more like insurance, small safety nets that prevent the shock of zero. Second step involves intentionally targeting fields where cultural preference and structural limits hold back automation. Research shows that industries connected to human trust, physical variability, or regulated care continue to resist mechanization. Healthcare services, therapy, social care, and skilled trades all show this pattern. Parents lean toward human childcare, patients rely on nurses and aides, and buildings continue to demand hands-on trades when repairs arrive unpredictably. Workers who steer their energy into these zones find slower erosion. The principle here is not that robots will never reach these spaces, but that structural and social resistance buys valuable stability. PwC's labor analyses repeatedly emphasize that jobs anchored in human contact and skills needing messy adaptation remain harder to automate in practice than roles built on clean datasets. Aligning skills into these resilient categories directs labor toward where human value is defended not just by preference, but by regulation and context. Working with AI instead of resisting it also changes outcomes. PwC's framework, sometimes summarized as buy, build, or bot, shows clearly that companies won't choose only between humans and machines. The most powerful position is not pretending machines can be ignored, but learning how to work alongside them. This means developing augmentative skills, treating AI as a coworker, speeding up tasks without surrendering control. Domain experts who understand how their profession functions, but also know how to apply AI tools to extend their effectiveness, are harder to replace. Economists describe these as bridge roles, blending technical literacy with professional expertise. The research also shows that employees signaling competence with AI tools capture a wage premium. Job listings across sectors already advertise higher salaries when candidates demonstrate AI fluency layered onto traditional work. That point carries a clear personal tactic. Invest in transferable AI-adjacent skills, data literacy, automation awareness, prompt shaping, so they can sit alongside core expertise. The resilience here lies in signaling adaptability to employers while stacking short-term protection into long-term relevance. At the same time, caution is needed around the temptation to chase trendy, temporary job titles. Prompt engineer is the common example. Early hype framed it as a secure entry point into the AI economy, with six-figure roles advertised across media outlets. Yet background research and industry analysis indicate this function may collapse into the systems themselves. Newer AI is already beginning to generate and refine its own prompts internally, automating what once seemed like a new career path. That makes prompt engineering better understood as a temporary hedge or transition skill, not a final destination. Workers investing heavily should treat it as a skill multiplier, part of a toolkit that signals adaptability, rather than a profession to carry for decades. The lesson is broader. Avoid dedicating full resources to jobs obviously under automation pressure. Short-term positioning can help, but long-term security requires pivoting into areas where machines struggle rather than those they are rapidly consuming. Entrepreneurship remains a critical option. When large corporations accelerate automation, they often reduce staff to protect margins. Independent businesses play by different rules, sometimes succeeding precisely because they highlight what machines lack. Local bakeries that advertise handmade goods, repair shops that focus on personal trust, or online creators who build communities through personality, all show resilience against the scale-driven logic of cutting costs through automation. Entrepreneurship can be modest. It doesn't demand inventing a new sector. It is often about reframing human work to emphasize authenticity. Workers who present their services as distinctively human, not generic and algorithmic, can build futures that flow outside the automation incentives squeezing corporate giants. Ownership over decision-making makes resilience possible where waiting for a corporate employer would not. Financial preparation underpins all of these moves. Resilience depends on liquidity, having a cushion for transitions, not just distant retirement accounts. Inflation pressure erodes stagnant savings, making diversified approaches more urgent. That means safety nets stored across multiple assets, investment in tools that hold value, or even cooperatives and community finance pools for shared resilience. The precise mix matters less than the recognition that shocks hit hardest when no cash is accessible. Families who keep at least a modest fund for sudden transition, months of rent, costs for relocation or retraining, face disruption with some margin of choice. Research consistently notes the psychological relief of even small safety funds when layoffs strike, reducing panic and enabling better decisions when recalibration becomes necessary. Education needs reframing too. In past decades, a degree was considered a lifelong security ticket. That idea no longer holds. Today's path is modular: certificates, micro-courses, focused projects, and self-directed learning updated repeatedly over time. Adaptability comes not from mastering one specialty, but from demonstrating consistent ability to shift. Online platforms, trade associations, and local workshops embody this logic. Building skill in cycles makes pivots more natural when disruption arises. Networking adds an equally important layer. Resilient workers often succeed by maintaining not just knowledge but connections. A wide network provides faster leads, references, and invitations into new roles. When automation closes one door, having multiple contacts across industries opens others. Studies on employment recovery repeatedly show networks cutting recovery time compared to skill alone. Adaptation also depends on mental framing. Workers who assume their profession lasts untouched for decades are stunned when machines enter earlier than expected. Those who anticipate disruption as normal update faster, with fewer illusions about permanence. Building a personal safety plan means asking concrete questions before collapse. If your job closes tomorrow, which skills do you expand? Which side project do you grow? Which contact could make a call on your behalf? Answering those questions in calm periods makes reaction easier in crisis. Mental rehearsal strengthens clarity when instability arrives. Even humor has practical value. Facing being outpaced by machines creates understandable despair, but satire and comedic reframing can keep stress manageable. Workers joking about the irony of being guided by mindfulness apps after losing jobs to chatbots tap into something real. Humor disarms anxiety enough to return to problem solving. Survival strategies stiffen under pressure. Laughter keeps mental flexibility in place. Identifying absurd trends and laughing at them, while staying grounded enough to avoid chasing hype, forms part of psychological resilience. Each of these tactics interlocks. Diversified income, aligning with human preference fields, entrepreneurship, financial safety nets, modular education, networking, adaptive mindset, humor. They are not replacements for structural protection, but they build layers. Add to them the research-driven strategies. Signal AI fluency in job materials. View prompt engineering as temporary. Position yourself as a bridge between domain expertise and AI adoption. As a final, immediate micro-action, take a simple step in the next week. Update one line on your LinkedIn profile or resume to reflect an AI-related project you've done, or explicitly state you can work with AI tools. It signals adaptability instantly and places you in the category of workers who benefit from the premium tied to AI familiarity. All of this underscores a difficult but empowering reality. Workers cannot control corporate strategy or national regulation, but they can exert control over personal preparation. Stability will not come from one fortress career path, but from weaving multiple defenses, skills, and mindsets into a living toolkit. Survival in an AI-shaped market is not about eliminating vulnerability. It is about ensuring no collapse leaves you without options. Still, hunkering down with strategies only solves one dimension of the problem. Even if you succeed in maintaining income and stability, another question lingers. What happens to meaning itself when work fades from the center of daily life? That deeper issue waits just beyond the financial and practical plans, and it reaches into how people define their identities when employment is no longer the anchor. The bigger picture, meaning without work. When jobs collapse, what people lose is more than income. It's the scaffolding that structured their lives. Daily routines, social standing, and long-term purpose were once wrapped around employment in ways so natural most barely noticed them. In 2025, the cracks in that structure grow harder to ignore. Whole fields that defined identity are being undone, leaving more people asking a question that felt abstract only a few years ago. If work no longer organizes our lives, what will? That question reaches beyond economics into psychology, health, community, and meaning itself. Retirement research offers a preview of where the void can lead. Studies consistently found that retirees often struggle not because they lack money, many had savings or pensions, but because they lose the sense of relevance and structure work imposed. Without tasks, mornings bleed into afternoons with no reason to move forward. Depression, loneliness, and worse health outcomes frequently rise when the anchor of employment vanishes overnight. Experts, including those working on AI safety, have speculated that mass automation could replicate this process for millions at once, creating a generation-wide form of early retirement. If large swathes of 30 and 40-year-olds find themselves displaced, the psychological fallout would echo what retirees have long endured, only at a much younger age and for far longer spans of life. Whether this future bends toward renewal or dislocation depends on how societies adapt. One vision carries optimism, human creativity flourishing when freed from routine labor. With machines covering the basics, people could paint, write, invent, or focus on community projects without the tether of paychecks. Some advocates argue this could trigger a cultural renaissance, where neighborhoods turn to collective problem-solving, arts, and science. We have imagined this outcome for generations, a life with chores outsourced to machines, so humans can cultivate knowledge, leisure, and deeper connection. This remains possible, but only if structures evolve to treat creativity and local contribution as valid replacements for job identity. Without cultural change, free time risks being seen not as value, but as wasted. The darker prospect emerges where structure collapses with nothing to replace it. Here, displaced workers may retreat into idleness or constant digital distraction. Years of algorithmic entertainment already shorten attention spans. Entire populations without work may slip further into cycles of passive consumption. Psychological studies warn that boredom without purpose breeds apathy and dependence. Retirees who failed to rebuild roles frequently declined. Expand that pattern across millions of working-age adults, and the effects could become cultural: diminished civic activity, lower innovation, loss of collective drive. Economists cannot measure easily what it means for communities to disengage from purpose, but history and health research suggest the damage could be severe. Between extremes lies a spectrum of reorientation. Some will double down on anchors outside the job market: family, friendship networks, sports, creative practice, or faith. Societies across history have found meaning in more than labor: ritual, spirituality, art, philosophy. Automation may force a cultural revival of those values. Perhaps identity will shift from resume lines to markers of contribution within communities or households, yet forming these new standards takes time. It rarely happens in a single election cycle or even a single generation. This lag ensures that many individuals will stumble through an identity crisis before broader norms provide stability. History captures the magnitude of what is happening. When industrialization swept farm workers into factories, family life and community routines restructured. Later, service economies did the same. Each transformation demanded decades of cultural adjustment to redefine what good work meant. What is different in 2025 is speed. What once unfolded over centuries now plays out inside a single human career. Parents who worked stable office jobs pass down definitions of dignity that collapse while their children are still deciding careers. Workers midstream must pivot without precedent, living through adjustments no earlier generation can model. That pace of collapse means disorientation is not the exception, it is the expectation. Culture already signals the unease. Online forums joke about futures where everyone loops endlessly through games, simulations, or scrolling feeds. Entertainment makes light of societies collapsing into pleasure and idleness. The humor works because behind it sits a quiet anxiety. Maybe abundance really will lead to wasted decades. Without structures to guide time, humans themselves may falter. That worry is not abstract. Work gave rules: wake up, commute, achieve progress. Strip those structures, and free time can feel overwhelming rather than liberating. Some observers even suggest that the entire framing of life around employment may have been misguided all along. Simulation theorists sometimes joke that if existence itself is constructed, the obsession with performance reviews and titles was never the point. Perhaps cooperation, exploration, or creativity was always the hidden mission. AI collapse, then, might be less a tragedy and more a revelation that meaning comes from domains we had sidelined. While semi-playful, this notion underscores the flexibility of human value. Work once seemed natural as life's anchor, but it may have always been just one way of framing purpose. Still, letting go of long-held anchors is not easy. Public health data repeatedly show that purpose matters as much as nutrition or exercise for well-being. Mass displacement without a framework risks cultural crises marked less by starvation than by emptiness. That possibility reframes the role of governments and communities. it may not be enough to manage wages or redistribute income. Societies may need to build programs, spaces, and projects that validate creativity and service outside the market. Support for local arts, volunteering, or science without obvious commercial value could matter as much to well-being as job stability once did. The issue is not whether economies need workers, but whether people need meaning. The answer has always been yes. Some economists are quick to point out that AI will not only destroy jobs, it could also generate new ones. Analyses from PwC and the World Economic Forum highlight that carefully managed adoption may produce whole new categories of work around green industries, human services, and data stewardship. In that framing, abundance is not inherently destabilizing. It depends on how societies direct technological gains. Meaning will not dissolve automatically if humans are given space to repurpose time creatively. These opposing views underline a central truth. The technology itself does not dictate outcomes. Social design, cultural adaptation, and political choices will decide whether abundance strengthens communities or hollows them out. At root, the problem circles back to identity. For centuries, individuals answered, "Who are you?" with "What I do." Employment codes shaped dignity, respect, and belonging. Strip that away, and societies must craft new answers. Will roles as creators, caregivers, or citizen builders emerge with authority? Or will outdated definitions persist until they collapse under their own irrelevance? The uncertainty signals why the transition feels so jarring. Even those who adapt personally still live inside a culture lagging behind its new reality. Philosophers, economists, and AI theorists all converge on one point: meaning without work is not automatic, it must be constructed. That construction will determine whether the world of post-employment feels liberating or hollow. And it is here, in this open question of identity, that the stakes may run deeper than simple employment numbers. The collapse of roles challenges what we choose to build lives around. If work no longer stands at the center, what comes next is a cultural decision, not a technological one. So perhaps the most personal question in this transformation is not, what new skills should I learn, but something closer to, if you had 30 extra hours each week no longer consumed by a job, what would you do with them? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your answer. Because in the end, this story doesn't stop at wages or training programs. It touches core definitions of humanity, meaning, and purpose. And that broader tension frames what comes next. Predictions claimed collapse would dominate, but the reality we now face is unfolding in ways even stranger, and in some ways more unsettling than those warnings ever suggested. Roman's predictions painted a bleak picture, but the reality of 2025 is less uniform and more complex. The scale of change is real, yet uneven. Some industries collapse quickly while others hold off disruption. Safety measures and government responses exist, but they lag behind, shaped more by corporate incentives and geopolitical competition than by worker protection. That leaves personal resilience as the clearest path, diversifying income, building AI literacy, and maintaining financial safeguards. If this analysis helped you, hit subscribe and comment which job you think will survive. The best replies may be featured in the next episode.